Well, today we're in downtown Washington, D.C., the corner of 10th and F Street. Now, behind me, of course, is very famous Ford's Theater. Just about everybody that has studied American history at all will know the significance of that place. Ford's Theater, of course, the place where Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth soon after he earned re-election in 1865. You might also remember that across the street is the house where Lincoln died at. Of course, he was taken to that house, and there he died. You can, of course, go see that place, but you can see the sign of their house where Lincoln died. So in one sense, this is a sobering spot for American history when we think about it. But ironically, Ford's Theater plays a part in Baptist history as well. The Ford's Theater building was the second location of the First Baptist Church of Washington, D.C. And so the First Baptist Church in Washington, D.C. was founded in 1802, soon after D.C. became the federal seat of government. And so the Baptists in this area had begun to meet together the year before, and then up from Baltimore came Pastor Lewis Richards. Lewis Richards had pastored for years in Baltimore, and he helped the church in Washington, D.C. get established. Now, Lewis Richards himself, pastor in Baltimore, had spent a lot of time in South Carolina with another great man from Baptist history named Richard Furman at the High Hills Baptist Church there in Charleston, South Carolina. And so from Richard Furman's influence on Lewis Richards, pastoring in Baltimore, and then Lewis Richards later in his life coming up here to Washington, D.C. to help Pastor Obadiah Bruen become the first pastor here at the First Baptist Church. So they had met at another place, but then a little while after that, they bought the property or moved to the property here that is where Ford's Theater is at. And so they used this property for many years for their church. But in, I believe it was 1861, the church wanted to relocate one more time. I don't know if it was maybe for more space or a different location. But in so doing, they sold their building to Mr. Ford, who renovated it and converted it into Ford's Theater that we would know of, certainly from U.S. history, as the fateful place where Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. So now, Pastor Brown, he pastored the First Baptist Church in Washington, D.C. for many years, I think about 40 years. Some interesting things took place during his time. One is that he, while he was a pastor here, twice served as chaplain of the House of Representatives, and then also one time as the chaplain of the U.S. Senate. Of course, things would be all together down here. He would have been having a working relationship with James Madison during that time. Also, during Pastor Brown's tenure as pastor of First Baptist Church, the nearby Columbian College was established by Baptists. Later, that would become George Washington University, but Columbian College was established as a school for Baptists to send students to train for, among other things, ministry and certainly missions. In fact, one of the members of Pastor Brown's church here, First Baptist of Washington, D.C., was none other than Luther Rice. Luther Rice, who had got on that ship, or that boat, headed to Burma to be a missionary at the same time as the Judsons. And like the Judsons, Luther Rice came to the belief in believers' baptism, and he came back to the States to help the Judsons raise support for their mission work, and he wanted to get back to the mission field, but he never did. Instead, Luther Rice was used greatly, traveled all up and down the States, raising support for foreign missions, particularly for the Judsons and many others that followed him. So I find it interesting that at the First Baptist Church of Washington, D.C., some interesting things converge. One, it was planted out of a church in Baltimore whose pastor was greatly influenced by Richard Furman in South Carolina. This pastor was influential in government, in the Senate and the House of Representatives as chaplain. Also that Pastor Brown helped start the Columbian College, and that Luther Rice, the great helper in Baptist history to raise support for missions during the early 1800s, was a member here as well. So an interesting place where American history and U.S. history converge. Of course, a lot of Lincoln history is here, the house where he died, and the Ford Theater. But I like to think also of this as a place of church and Baptist history when the Lord used this area greatly in his service. So, Washington, D.C., 10th and F Street, Pastor Brown, First Baptist Church of Washington, D.C.